welcome to React Native Radio, episode 102. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Spencer Carley.
Hey, everyone.
And our special guest today, someone who normally is a panelist on this show, is Gant Laborde. Welcome to the show, Gant.
Welcome, friends!
And Gant, we typically just have you on as a co-host, and we're interviewing other people, but now we're going to be interviewing you. And I think a lot of people kind of already know who you are, but do you want to introduce yourself just in case someone doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to say, wow, it's a lot nicer on this side being the guests rather than the panelists. I had to prepare exactly 0, so that was really fun. So everybody, hi, I'm Gant. If you haven't met me before, I am a mad scientist with JavaScript. And I work for an amazing company called Infinite Red. They help me go around to conferences and speak and work on cool technology and open source. So if you want to do any of those things, talk about technology, weird stuff, and talk to me at a conference, please come up and say hi.
Yeah, so speaking of conferences, we just wrapped up Chain React. So when this episode comes out, it'll probably be about 4 weeks. That was a really nice conference. That's the second one you got.
Thank you.
But
yeah.
It was really fun.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to us. Definitely anybody who went to it, anybody who saw just interacted in any way, even on Twitter, letting us know really helps out because it's a bunch of developers putting on a conference. And, a big part of that is that we know what developers like. But it really is just a bit more scientific. This year we got way better feedback. For year 1, we were on cloud 9 because everybody said they loved it. And this time we got better feedback. So we're on the border of about to OD on conferences. This is so nice. But yeah, it was really, really fun. I was really happy to have everybody there. And I love getting to see everybody because I don't even get to see my coworkers all the time. We're 100% remote. And I get to see them in video constantly. And it's really kind of nice to just see them in person and just continue the same conversation. There's something sort of fun and human about that. We only get to see each other about twice a year, but it's nice because it's like, hey, we are real friends. You do exist.
Yeah, totally. I get that working remotely because I work remotely as well. And sometimes if I'm away for more than like a month, I feel really disconnected and stuff. So I know you.
Dude, let me know. We'll do a virtual coffee.
That's the thing. I do virtual everything. I don't do real one-on-one stuff.
Well, you don't live that far. It's just one day, Nader, we're gonna have to drive and have coffee halfway.
But I guess another interesting thing is Infinite Red's been doing consulting for quite a while, and you've been doing, you've never put on a conference in the past, but you were involved, right, in other conferences as sponsors and stuff around was it Ruby Motion or not Ruby Motion?
Yes, it was. It was Ruby Motion. You're right.
So Ruby Motion's like a way to build mobile apps with Ruby, and then when React Native come out, you guys kind of pivoted to that, and now you're like full scale React Native shop kind of, or React and React Native.
Yeah. Yeah, we love it. I'll be honest. I am an events lover. I love going to events. I love going to conferences. I actually threw Mardi Gras balls here in New Orleans. So this was sort of one of those things where it kind of came up. We had a lot of really talented people. And one of the funny things that happens with conference going is you have to wear a lot of hats. You have to have some soft skills. You have to really enjoy meeting and or actually just care about people. And what's great about it is we have a lot of people who are like that. And Frank, who is the stagehand, Frank Von Hoven, he works in theater in his out of work time. He came into development with an MBA. So he has a bunch of different skills. We have our CEO, Todd, who loves photography. So he uses the conference as a great opportunity to take really cool photos and kind of walk around and get backstage and see all the stuff. He even started taking some really weird photos of me while I was on stage. She was like walking up behind me. I was like, oh, it's like we have a real professional photographer here. So I really enjoy it because it lets us play and be creative and start to really kind of nurture, more than our development side and our design side. We just treat ourselves as creatives and see what we can do.
So the topic, though, I guess we can go ahead and jump to the topic. I would love to actually talk about conferences.
Let's do it.
We should have a conference episode, actually, because I don't know, a lot of us are really big into speaking at conferences and also going to conferences.
That's a great idea. I'm put me down for that one.
But the topic is going to be the React State Museum, and it's really a conversation about state management and React Native in general. But there was an article you wrote about this called the React State Museum, so we figured we kind of structure the podcast episode about that. But do you want to kind of just talk about, what your take is on state management in this article, and then we can kind of talk about the different options and kind of how state management today is different than it was a year ago and then 2 years ago even.
You know the best words to tell me, which is, do you want to talk about? Absolutely. So specifically the State Management Museum, here's a quick story, right? We all start off with understanding props in state, managing state and React Native. And then at some point we need a state management system or, whatever. We can go the hippie life, set state, live free, right? So most of us, this kind of showed up with Redux, and Redux took a little bit of time to understand, and we kind of spent this time understanding it. Some of us had to learn how to touch it, and some of us had to learn how to teach it. And there's different kinds of skills that you got with state management. And lately, Redux has been getting kicked in the teeth by lots of major companies. And I still think it's a great solution for a certain set of people, but it's not the solution for everybody. And I don't want people to hate Redux. I think it really works for a certain group. And we at Infinite Red found we've been torn away from Redux for a couple of good reasons. One, we want more type safety, and two, we're kind of working into GraphQL. So we are looking at GraphQL and we're looking at MobX state tree, and those tie in well with TypeScript with a little bit of not so great fitting, but you can kind of get those things to shimmy together. And now this state management system that you've used for a year, or you've kind of like figured stuff out, you have to justify, why am I switching? What do I care about? What fits for me? And I find that's quite jarring. I'm sure, and let me just kind of open up for a second. Nat or Spencer, how many state management systems do you know? Nat, I know you've written blog posts on several. How many do you know?
I mean, I've written applications in 3, I guess. And that's if you consider GraphQL like a state management system. So I've written applications in Shipped and MobX and Redux, and then in GraphQL. I've played around with MobX state tree a lot. I like that. And I also like I forgot the name of it, but it's the one that was put out by Jamie. I forgot his last name, but the guy on Twitter that's like always like saying, crazy and interesting things, but I forgot his name, but I'm talking
Jamie
about.
Kyle?
James Kyle.
Yeah.
He created something that I really like, but I haven't had an opportunity to actually use it. But like really, I know really well, like enough to use Redux and MobX, and it's only because I've had experience, and everyone else might be, having their own opinions and stuff. So.
Right, yeah. And then you had to have like these moments, or sometimes you pick up a code base. Spencer, how many state management systems have you had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I started set state, sadly created an entire application with sending props down 15 levels through set state when I first started with React. So that was a learning experience. But then, used Redux has been my tool for like the last year and a half, but now I'm moving more towards a combination of using the new context API, set state in appropriate circumstances, and then really like when the opportunity is available to me, using GraphQL to manage, both remote and local state, kind of like in one spot has been the biggest thing. But like actually toying around, I'd say half the things you talked about in React State Museum I've tinkered with, but not actually built anything of significance with them yet.
Right. Yeah. And then it's hard to evaluate because here's the thing. I mean, it took me, and I find myself not a complete imbecile. It took me a while to feel confident in Redux. And then there's all these options out there. I mean, we talk about JavaScript fatigue. There's no good way for us to really evaluate what the hell is going on out there. And so I had some difficulty in sort of understanding what the differences were on some of these technologies, or even being able to articulate that, right? How do you compare an apple and a pear, right? Is it fair to? Oh, am I rhyming on purpose? I don't think so. But what happens is I was like, all right, I need this. I know everybody else needs this. So I had originally decided to grab 10 state management systems. I included set state and the context API from React 16. And I said, I'm going to go out there and grab the top 10. And I'm going to write the same exact React Native app in all 10. And I will see the differences. I will be able to display the differences. I will understand the differences. It will be clear and clean. And I was like, this is going to be a slightly difficult task, but I'll do it. I had no idea at the time that it was going to grow to be very difficult, because if we do it in React Native, all of our listeners here are happy with it. We understand that. But there was no reason to not do it in React as well. So you need to have, like, what's the difference? Can we see this in React? Can we see this in React Native? Sometimes there is a difference. Sometimes there's none. And it sort of serves as, I like to call it the Rosetta Stone of state management, because if you know Redux, you can look at the Redux solution and say, I understand what's happening here. Then go to any other language and sort of help yourself see, is there something beneficial there? Is there something different or complicated? What makes this state management system exist? And sometimes the answer is, oh, it's beautiful. And sometimes the answer is, oh, because somebody wanted to write their own state management system and add to the pile. And that's what inspired the React State Museum, was to simply get in there. The original concept was 10 state management systems written in React and React Native, so that way we could see what the hell is the difference between MobX and MobX State Tree. You know, when I was in Finland and I gave the talk about how we're moving from Redux to MobX State Tree, I got several people afterwards who said, I didn't know that that was really that there was any difference between MST and MobX. And I'm like, I feel your pain. Right? Like how would you have known unless you spent the time sitting there and looked at both the repos and said, oh, this is what the differences are. And that can be pretty difficult. So that was the inspiration for it. And here we land much, much later. I think I've got with contributions from people, like 20 state management systems now. So yeah, it's gone very, very well, getting to see all the stuff that exists there. And some of them are really exciting, and some of them are just plain weird.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think this whole entire conversation about state management is a really good look at how things in JavaScript maybe are done differently than other languages, or maybe other ecosystems and communities. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there are a million ways to do almost anything in JavaScript, whereas I feel like a lot of people coming to JavaScript maybe have come from other ecosystems, maybe like Rails, where everything is done a single way. So you know which way to do it, and people kind of agree on things. Maybe not 100% they agree on everything, but they agree on more things maybe than we do. But when you're coming into development with React or JavaScript in general, and you look at something like this and you see that there's 20 different ways to do that, and then within each implementation, there's even dozens of libraries around Redux, for example, to do these things. It's pretty overwhelming. So what's your recommendation for people that are kind of don't want to get confused by looking at these options. Would it be more for people that are like advanced to try all these things out, or is this kind of like for anyone?
No, this is definitely for anyone. And it's, I think, like I said this before, the great benefit of React Native is this sort of plethora of options. I mean, you can almost pull down any node module as long as it doesn't access, files or expect the DOM to exist, right? And you can use that in React Native. You can use all these tools to kind of get the job done that have standing on the shoulders of giants really helps you get that sort of rapid application feel. And I feel like this is the curse side of it. Like, this is the same problem, is that you have so many options, right? If you take a look at Flutter, where Google is sort of saying this is the prescribed system for all of this, and you've got to bring everything in from Dart. It's just sort of, I feel like JavaScript developers who are looking to apply their skills in a lot of different locations and a lot of different ways are happy by being able to pull in things and say, okay, I can bring this over here and use it in web, in mobile, in desktop, in Electron if I wanted to. I could do this sort of this concept, but that's once you've chosen it. The initial choosing process is that sort of overwhelming, Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors, right? By the time you've picked one out, you've spent a lot of time, maybe sometimes you have to skip a lot of really viable and great options just simply because there's too many. And that's in a way, a beautiful problem that we have in React and React Native, but it is tiring, right? You need to put lots of time into R&D because you need to know if the path you're going down is going to actually finally end up where you want it to be. And I think that what the React State Museum does is it kind of shows you all the different systems that are out there, but allows you to take it to where you came from. So if you came from something that had static types, maybe you want a state management system that's going to go ahead and blow a whistle if there was a problem. If you just learned React and you're very familiar with React and you wish you could set state on a component at sort of like a shared level, then maybe unstated is perfect for you, right? Because then you're just using that same concept, set state, right? It didn't change. I'm just not having to pass things down, which sort of feels like also like like Spencer was saying, you could use unstated and context. They feel like one's a little bit of sugar on top of the other. And it's really nice. And maybe you really want to go into GraphQL, right? What's the cost of that? If you were to sit there in a business meeting, somebody says, hey, what is it going to take for us to use GraphQL Apollo with Amazon AppSync, right? I want to know what this looks like. If you've not done it, then you're looking at probably a day of R&D. But if you have an example ready to go that sort of like translates over to something else, that helps out a bit. Or maybe you want to use Apollo Link State. And I think that as you're kind of in this evaluation process, it's very valuable. Once you've chosen, of course, then it becomes sort of like a hobby mentality. It's like, oh, look at these other cute things. Maybe I'll do that on a weekend project or something like that. So I think that both people, both expert and sort of neophyte, can really benefit by taking a look at what's out there. And some of the best developers I know are constantly unsatisfied with the technology that they've chosen, not in a way that it affects politically inside their company, but in a way that they will track down and look at code that other people have written and other mentalities to see if there's some kind of aspect of that that's beautiful that they can bring back home to their company.
Yeah, that makes sense. But as far as, I guess, as a single developer though, like coming into it, would you maybe recommend focusing on certain ones that are more popular, not because they're better, but just because they're more popular? Or would you kind of tell new people coming in to worry more about, what's the best solution as opposed to what's the most popular solution.
Yeah, it would. So, I mean, I think we've all kind of got an answer since we have our three that we know, right? We know which ones are better than others for different aspects. I think Redux is still fantastic for large companies that have very complex management of their state. One time we built a project for a client that had so many different layers of communication. And that's just because it was a large company. They had a sockets API, they had RESTful calls, they had a couple other things that kind of got tied in. And all these things had to kind of come together into this, hey, anybody can show up. And with a small intro course, they can read everything that's going on. They can identify how to work with it, and then they can become a contributor in a small amount of time. And I think that for that company, them still using Redux to this day is fantastic because they don't have to worry about those APIs changing. There's just a lot of locked in sort of calls that needed to be understood and read. And I know it takes a lot longer to add things in Redux. I know it does. It's the hourly developer's friend. It is, but it's clear and clean. And though there's a lot of boilerplate, the developer's ahead of what it is that they're writing. And so for that company, I think it's great that they use that particular architecture. And somebody just coming in and brand new, I think that, sort of like you were saying, Spencer, I think it's not a bad idea for them to, if you have the opportunity to give them a spin up time, let them actually write something small and let them see it go all the way through with set state. Let them pass everything down, see the big picture, and then come back and either apply whatever the company is using or apply context or apply something like that. I don't think that we should condemn one state management system over another by far. And I know it seems overwhelming to say that, like, it would be way better. And trust me, I have my opinions, right? We all have. I mean, I'm sure if somebody said, hey, Natter, which one should I use? You could ask a couple questions and be like, in my opinion, this, done. But it's not such a bad plan to kind of get in there and find something that really fits the company and the people who are working on it. And I mean, I wouldn't shove Apollo Link State into a project that's going to be using REST resources. I wouldn't shove Apollo where it's not needed, right? And I don't think that it's fair to shove your preferred state management system into any project just because that's the one that you know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really interesting because, when you're first learning something, and also when your team is learning something, you don't want to waste your time learning something that's going to go away. So it's a lot of times I would recommend, at least with something like state management where there are already solutions that people have built and shipped applications with that we know work, even if there are certain decisions in those frameworks or in those implementations that we don't 100% like, at least we know that this solution works, it's been battle tested, people have used it, and it's a safe bet. You know what I mean? And it's kind of you may see something new and shiny and cool, and it may be even better than what's out there. You still end up choosing something, but based on, the community's previous, bets, I guess you'd say. And that it's still going to work. You're not really gambling. And it's about making trade-offs like that when you're building something in your company.
Yeah, that's the right word for it, trade-offs, right? I mean, we're doing this for some kind of benefit. And I think that contract's unique to the company. And so you have to factor in. And I think the worst thing is not understanding what the trade-off is. So that's the perfect word for it, Natter, is you have to remember each one of these is a trade-off. And what are you giving and what are you receiving if you know the answers to those, you can make an intelligent decision. If you don't know the answers to those and you're just taking, okay, well, this is what people told me to do, then your trade-off is probably worse for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also valuable to consider you can use a combination of state management solutions. Like a lot of people that I talk to, okay, I'm using Redux, so everything needs to be in Redux. But if you're putting together a form and that's data that's just temporary, that you just need, that username and password for a moment until you hit sign in, it doesn't make sense necessarily to put that into Redux. Maybe set state is a more appropriate use case for that instance. And just using that combination of different state management solutions, that's what I do a lot, because like you said, Redux, there's a lot you've got to write with it.
Yeah.
And if the state is very much encapsulated to that specific form or to a specific component, and you don't foresee any reason to share that state outside of that component, I think I'm still going to reach for set state in that instance every time. And then, once my state starts to get more complex, that's what I'm going to look at, with Redux, MobX, or now looking more towards Apollo Link State or AppSync, those types of solutions.
Yeah, that's the smart ways, because then you can choose it. I like the idea of not over engineering things, right? And that's what you're saying is perfect, because you can make a really strategic decision. And if everybody and that's a good litmus test. If everybody in the company understands what the hell's going on there, and it's not just explained to them as magic that they have to accept. As we all know, magic numbers, magic code, magic frameworks is probably a terrible sin that we all pay for at some time. You have to understand, hey, if I know what this was doing before I entered and used Redux, right? And I knew what the trade-off was and what the benefit is this managed globally? Is there going to be any other side on the entire other corner of the application that's going to need to touch this state? Yes. Okay. Is this a managed component, right? Is this component just self-sufficient? And that, which I think makes it a bit more, a bit more friendly for everybody, if it could be either. And then you can manage its state when you need to. And that's sort of one of those concepts you really don't get when you first start React or React Native. You just are trying to get things to work, right? And once it works, that is the correct answer.
Right.
The funny thing is now we're looking at things as multiple correct answers, some more, which one was a local minima that we thought was great, but then just a little bit further, we found something a little bit better, but we had to suffer a bit in order to get there. And I think it's really cool to start thinking of that problem. That's advanced React, in my opinion.
So when I'm looking at the React State Museum and I'm thinking about all this stuff, I want to kind of boil this down to people that are listening, what my opinions are about what state option they should use, I guess. Maybe we can kind of discuss the ones that we like and that we would recommend using, and maybe also talk about things that we don't like other options that we don't like, not to intentionally hurt anybody's feelings or to offend anybody, because these are just our opinions. But the fact is, everybody on this podcast right now, we've shipped a lot of React and React Native applications. There are definitely better developers out there, but at least we have some context as far as our opinions are concerned, and maybe we can kind of give some good insight around this stuff, because this seems to be a super popular topic. Not just in React Native, of course, but in React in general, and maybe in single-page JavaScript application architectures in general, because it's not an easy problem to solve. In fact, it's a super hard problem to solve. That's why there's so many people working on stuff like this. But so if you were going to build an app today, what would you use if you had complete control over the app and you knew the client was a serious project that you had to kind of deliver and nothing could go wrong? And then what would you use today if you were building just a fun side project and you wanted to learn something new that was not something you already knew really well? I guess I'll start with with Spencer maybe.
Yeah. So, and like this is actually something I'm kind of working through right now on a client project. But so there's two paths I'm currently going down. One, like it's a very serious application. If I don't have any control over the back end, and like if there's a variety of different use cases, and especially if I need to like pass this on to another team of developers in the future, like I'm still going down the Redux route. One, I'm just very, very familiar with it. It's what I've been using, for years at this point. And what I also find really valuable is like there's a lot of documentation. There's a ton of examples, and examples are really how I can kind of pick up and understand what I'm doing. And then also just like all the ways you can build on top of Redux. You've got Redux Saga, you've got Redux Persist, Redux Offline, all these different things. You've also got different debugging tools that kind of hook into that, where you can manage and modify your state without actually having to interact inside of your app, because all of that is just stored there. Another reason I am still tending to go towards Redux is I come from a Meteor.js background where there was just a lot of magic all of the time. So, and like when an application gets to, a certain size, that magic just gets really, really confusing. So I love how verbose Redux is. Like you can walk through each step exactly what's going on. And like, yes, it's more to type, but it's always super, super clear what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening. So that's something I really like on Redux. But looking more towards the future and looking at the project, one of my primary projects right now, where, data is being shipped where I can access it through GraphQL, and I'm already using Apollo on that project to access that data, interact with that data. So why bring another solution into that? Why bring Redux into that solution where I'm already using Apollo to manage state? Why not use Apollo to also manage my local state, to do all of that? And that's kind of the way I'm moving in the future. My only hesitation with that is like, I'm not as familiar with it. I don't know where to find my examples. I don't know exactly where to find the right documentation, the right resources to learn the ins and outs that just come as a result of working with a tool for years like I have for Redux.
Nice.
So if you were to kind of learn something new and play around with something new in like a project that wasn't super, super important, what would you try out that you haven't tried out yet, or that you haven't really shipped yet?
I'm still leaning towards GraphQL. I just think it's such or Apollo and Apollo Link State, just because there's so much flexibility there. There's so many tools building on top of it. Like that's really where my focus is, like a combo of Apollo / GraphQL plus, just simple set state is how I want my applications to work, just because there's minimal dependencies there, and I can manage the remote data, local data, all within the same thing. All within one dependency.
Yeah, totally. I'm really interested in Apollo Link State. I've tried it out and it works pretty well. There's a lot of things I don't know as far as if I'd like to build out something, for a client, something of importance. There's certain areas that I'm sure I don't understand yet, but the general concept is pretty easy to grok once you kind of follow the documentation and set up a demo project. It's kind of a brand new way of kind of thinking about stuff. You're when you're dealing with GraphQL in general, you're rethinking a lot of things to begin with, and then this just adds another cool, interesting idea on top of that. So, what about you, Gant?
Well, first off, before I jump in, I want to say in the React State Museum, we have an Apollo Link State example, but not the React Native counterpart to it. I have yet to take the web example and move it over to native. And so I would like to say, hey, Natter, Spencer, anybody listening, if you want to contribute, there's a couple of spots, because it takes a bit of time for me to keep coming in and the tests I have to run on this thing with 20 plus projects, it takes like 4 hours. So if anybody wants to come in, that's a great opportunity to contribute. Speaking about Apollo Link State, I've got it seems a lot more React examples than React Native examples. And so I could use some help in getting those contributions. And if you contribute, I will definitely have your picture down at the bottom. I'm happy about always sharing all the credit as much as possible. I think it's awesome. That being said, a project's working on this is an interesting kind of question because during the project, I fell in love with the interestingness of state machines. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to hear David Piano talk or Michael Bertoli. I'm sure I ruined his name, but it's okay. You have to fly over from Italy to get me. But the state machine sort of way of looking at state management doesn't actually dictate what kind of state management you use. It dictates how your state management flows. And that was super interesting to me. So when I tried to implement that part of it, I found that it's actually can bolt on to any state management system you have, and it can sort of control that you can't end up in a weird state because you've written a state machine for your state management. And what's cool is when you do that, you get a graph showing you all the different states your app can be in. You get the ability to walk through it on a website. It can do really cool detection for you automatically. You can't submit a form unless it's in a certain state because it won't allow it to move to that next state. So when you click the button, it's like, hey, this button can't even move us to the next state because we're not in they filled out the form state. So it kind of works in with validation and other stuff. And it's a different way of looking at the problem that I didn't expect to run across. But hearing both of those gentlemen speak and sort of finally trying it out, I want to see how far I could put that into any project. So if I use Redux or if I'm using MobX State Tree or if I'm using anything, I actually kind of want to get React Automata and plug that in to work as well because it's so cool. And it automatically generates tests of every possible state your app could be in, which I'm a huge fan of automatic test generation. Do either of you use story shots for your storybook tests?
I don't. No, I'd never heard of it. Kind of the head in the sand developer.
Yeah. So when I was writing tests, and I would always be using the snapshot feature of Jest, and I loved it. But then on the other side of using Storybook, you basically got this a one-to-one. Your storybook is the same thing that you're testing over in your tests, and you're taking snapshots. So StoryShot automatically takes snapshots of your storybook for testing. So it's all you have to do if you really care about the shape or the dynamic of the component with certain props, then all you have to do is, and make sure it runs, then all you have to do is just keep being really good at Storybook. And when you press a button at the end of the day, it generates snapshots of everything in there for you. And that sort of automation of React, React is so much UI, right? That it's kind of cool to get all those kind of different states, those different properties passed into your components, snapshotted. Then over on the state side, if you have a state machine where you've identified all the different states you want your app to be in, you've got the same benefit. React Automata will take snapshots of what happens when, in mutating and moving from one state to another, all the permutations of the state. And you could build reports off this. Definitely check out David Piano's talk at React Finland. Amazing talk. That'll really kind of get you primed for saying, I'm interested in state system, in adding a state system to my React state, right? And with React Automata, it's really easy. So I kind of want to push that in as something I did not realize, and I want to add it to everything now just to see how it all kind of plays in. Word of caution, I've only done it in the example here for set state, so I don't have it working with everything else yet. So I don't know if it'll fit just as nicely as it sounds, but it seems like it would. And it causes you to think about it a different way. And then on top of that, that's probably the most experimenting I'd want to do right now. And then I'd either go with Redux, MobX State Tree, or GraphQL. Those are my three favorites, unless I'm teaching, in which case context or unstated are fantastic for students just kind of grasping the concepts right away. Oh man, that's just, those two are perfect. But if you aren't teaching and you're trying to deliver something that you know is going to be stable, MobX State Tree is fantastic. Of course, GraphQL Apollo with Amazon AppSync, or if you actually have the server or something set up, it's going to be fantastic. And then, of course, you can always go to Redux, and Redux can do anything that you want, especially with sagas, like you were saying, Spencer. I think it's really cool to, you have the fine grain control because you built that radio, right? You soldered on every part. You know exactly where everything is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I guess. I like all of the choices that you kind of laid out there. They're kind of similar to what I would do. I think the most interesting thing you said, though, is that when you teach, you like to teach unstated, which is a fairly new library. That's the one that I was saying I kind of was interested in shipping something with. Why do you think people pick that up better? I guess I'm assuming it's just because you're still using like state and set state and things like that.
Yeah, I think that because, let's think of when the benefits start coming in with all these complex systems. It's with async kind of concepts, it's with background processes, it's with middleware, right? And starting people off with middleware before they've actually felt the pain to really care about needing to run middleware is too abstract. Right, it's starting at a 4,000 level course, and people just don't understand it. So I actually like to cut it all out, and I think that unstated, just the syntax. I almost wish that when context came out, that it was a lot more like unstated in some way. And it was so clean, it's so simple. It's like I'm subscribing to this. The provider consumer sort of squiggly parentheses syntax of context, it can start to get a little unreadable to beginners. And it's not really fair because like readability is very important in my opinion. And I find a lot of other things way more readable than some of the choices made there. And I don't think that's something I can like go in and do a pull request and be like, hey, let's change this. And that would be readily accepted. So I feel okay complaining about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that that's something that I've been kind of leaning towards too, as far as like teaching, trying to kind of find the easiest way to kind of introduce a state management solution that isn't just set state. And I'm wondering if for beginners, like not only learning unstated but also using it in production might be a good idea. But again, when you're using something new like unstated, I don't really know the limitations because I haven't shipped anything yet. But I know with Redux, there are just a million different libraries and a lot of documentation and a million blog posts. Pretty much anything you need done can be done, or for sure, actually, anything you need has been done at this point in Redux. And not only that, but you can actually find an example usually where someone's actually written that code, and you can just get an idea of how something works without having to make it up yourself, which is good for people that are especially just getting started.
I would add on that. It's perfect for work. Redux is perfect for work. It's terrible for the weekend warrior. It's if like you've just got 4 hours on a Saturday to get something cranked out, and first thing you've got to do is you understand React, and now you've got to learn Redux, and you've got to look up all those things. And I feel like that's just, it's a sin. It's so difficult. Like I can't recommend Redux to somebody who's just looking to do it as a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good analysis. And it's exactly the way I would kind of also. Well, I would say my outlook or my opinions are slightly different, but they're very much along the same lines. I've been using MobX now for a year and a half, along with Redux, and I'm starting to get to the point where I kind of like MobX a little bit better, believe it or not. I know, and I've always been someone that really has been a big proponent of Redux, and the reason I like Redux is the same reason Spencer mentioned. there's no magic going on. There's nothing that's different about like what's happening versus what's happening under the hood. It's just all JavaScript functions that are being run, and there's nothing where you never run into these weird things where the framework is doing something that isn't just JavaScript, you know? So you can always run down errors pretty easily, at least in my experience. With the newest release of MobX, they've changed it a little bit to where, at least this is my understanding, and I have tried it out a little bit, and I've been already shipping MobX before this, but they've changed the values that are being returned. They are observables, but they're no longer treated as observable values in your data, so they end up being just regular arrays and regular data structures. And I think that's going to be an improvement over the previous implementations. But so that's one plus that I've seen as far as like the iteration that MobX has had. But I really kind of have gotten just used to how MobX works, and I'm liking the fact that a lot of times I'm working with teams of mobile developers that are coming in from native, and I feel like it's much easier for them to pick up MobX than it is for them to pick up Redux. Maybe just because MobX is easier to pick up in general, not just for native developers, but for anyone. But you do have to, like, you can't just use MobX and expect everything to work, and it will work, but you can't just take that for granted. You have to actually understand, like, what's going on under the hood, because there's some issues that you'll run into. Like, for instance, if you use a flat list with React Native and your render item method, but because it's abstracted as part of that component, it's the values were no longer observed. So if you end up changing like an item in the array, the flat list does not re-render. You have to actually do some work there, and that's not very apparent. Little bugs like that, or not bugs, but little situations like that you'll run into with MobX. Whereas with Redux, you would not run into those.
Yeah, I agree. MobX. So in the React State Museum, I think the MobX example is probably the smallest lines of code out of all of them. The hardest part about MobX is getting it set up with the decorators. If you're using that and just getting those kinds of things, there's a few gotchas to the beginner. But once it's set up, it's just like it feels like editing globals. It's really what it feels like. And it's fantastic in that sense because it's a lot smarter. It's doing way more than that. And you don't even have to really think too hard all the time. And the lines of code of just kind of pulling in and working with MobX is super small, super simple, as long as you're okay with decorators and your project's been set up for you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, especially coming from Redux, where I've been teaching and stuff, for a couple of years, React and React Native. Teaching Redux versus teaching MobX is just, I'm almost to the point where I don't teach Redux anymore, especially to beginner classes, because it's kind of just like so much overhead and it's so much to try to grok when you're learning a new framework. And I feel like MobX has been a much easier thing to introduce there. And also now that you mentioned that, I'm thinking about maybe even trying out unstated as well, because really you can kind of implement a basic state management with either one of those libraries in about 10 minutes just to kind of show a demo. So I would say, like, if I was starting a new project today, of course, if I was using GraphQL, I would look at the different solutions there. There are, a few ways to handle state management with GraphQL. Sometimes you don't have, your entire application isn't GraphQL, so you have to actually combine a couple of things. You can't just put everything in Apollo link state or whatever. You have to also take into consideration that you have REST APIs you're working with. But if I was entirely on GraphQL, I would try to implement Apollo link state. I haven't actually shipped anything with that. I have shipped GraphQL, but I haven't used Apollo link state. If I was doing a brand new React or React Native project from scratch today, I would definitely reach for either MobX or MobX. What is it? Forgot the name of it. The MobX library that actually has types.
MobX State Tree.
Yeah, MobX State Tree. I was like MobX State Tree. No, that's not right. We're talking about React State Museum, and then
the words are mixing.
I blame
Michelle. Terrible naming, Michelle.
MobX State Tree is cool because you end up with types, but also you end up with a lot of helper methods to do things like deleting from an array and it makes it's like an API you actually have to learn, but it's not that big a deal. It's pretty nice. So if you like MobX, you're able to kind of have a more structured way of writing it, whereas with MobX, you kind of have you can do whatever you want. With MobX State Tree, it's a little more defined as far as what you can and can't do. And then if I was going to be writing like a side project on my own and it didn't really matter, I would probably either do Apollo Link State if I was in charge of the back end, or I would do Unstated for sure. One of those two.
Yeah, it's so cool to be able to have these choices. And if you're lucky enough to have the time, it's sort of like as like most people hear state management and cringe, but when you get to play with it like this, right, it gets fun again. And that's kind of where we learn, right? I think that it's important to be willing to take a look at all these different libraries and say, did this person create it because they had a really good idea? Or did they create it because there was a pain point? Or did they create it because, hey, let's go ahead and add another state management system for everybody?
Well, I think we're kind of getting close on time. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on before we wrapped up the show?
No, man, it's just really, really great to be a guest on this awesome podcast.
Well, yeah, it's cool to have you on as a guest. If someone wants to kind of, I guess, learn more about this, you have we haven't really talked about the repo, but you have this React State Museum repo that's really awesome that shows how to implement state in all of these libraries, but it also has links to not only GitHub repos, but actually working CodePen projects. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got CodePen, regular the code, and then the React Native code. And some people have been very nice and did Expo versions of that. So you can check it out straight from your browser, which is really nice.
Nice. Yeah, so check that out if you're interested in all this stuff. And I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Spencer, do you have any picks?
When you start a new project, typically you need things like a domain name, hosting, things like that. When I choose hosting, I pick mine for the options it gives. I like to know what I'm getting and set things up just how I like them. This is why, for your projects, you should check out Linode. Linode servers feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabyte network, and Intel E5 processors. That's all the power you need to run VMs under full control, or Docker containers, who doesn't love that, encrypted disks, and VPNs. Plus, they have 10 data centers across the world and add-ons like backups, Node Balancer, and Longview to help you control your server costs. They also offer block storage for your static files, and you can get started with a $20 credit if you use the code REACTNative2018. That credit is good for 4 months on their 1 gigabyte server. That's a lot of time to try them out and see if they're the right fit for you. That code again is REACTNative2018. Also, if you're interested in working for Linode, they're hiring. Head to linode.com/careers to see their available positions.
I've got 0/2. So first one is just kind of like this last month, I've just kind of been like completely offline. Like, you know, I get a lot of tech information from Twitter. Just completely like shutting that off has been nice and just actually like getting things done. So like I recommend doing that from time to time if you don't have a ton of self-control. Like I don't have a ton when it comes to Twitter. I can, you know, lose an hour pretty quick. So like kind of just like saying for a month, like just done, I think it's not really a pick, but just life advice. It was nice. It was fun. The other side, again, not specifically related to React Native, but, and I'll have to send a link, but I watched this video from the Weather Channel yesterday, and I thought it was one of the best examples of augmented reality usage and just like showing the different destructive nature of tornadoes. And I thought that was really cool, just seeing like, you know, how we've now got capabilities to use AR in our apps, different use cases we can actually use to use that. So yeah, just sometimes it's nice to take a little bit of a break from the world of technology and keeping up with everything.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes when I end up taking a break, I find it super hard to pull myself away from work. And it's really stressful for me for some reason. But then once I'm away from work, I found it actually hard to get back into work. I don't think I found that to be the case.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm in that phase right now.
Gant, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I'd say please check out the blog post on the React State Museum. That'd be awesome. That's and if you can, hit the clap button. That's how I know anybody's reading it whatsoever. Also, I would like to say that I will be speaking about the React State Museum at Connect Tech, a conference coming up in October. So that'll be a lot of fun. If you are in Atlanta and you want to go to an amazing conference, go to Connect Tech, and we can talk a lot more about state management there. And of course, the React Native EU is coming up in September. I'll be there. I will not be talking about state management. Instead, I'll be talking about a project that's near and dear to my heart, Solidarity. So I'll definitely be happy to meet anybody and talk about all these cool things at any time. But those two conferences, or if you want to talk about testing, like I said, the tests for this project for React State Museum take 4 hours to run because there's so many different smaller projects that have to be checked out. But I'll be talking about testing at React Alicante in September too. So if anybody's going to see me at any of those things, I would love to chat with you.
I have a couple of picks. Well, I'll be at Connect Tech too as well if anyone wants to go there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. AWS Amplify, building serverless mobile apps using AWS and React Native. So that's going to be cool. So I'm glad that you'll be there. I'll see you there.
Nice.
But I guess my main picks are GraphQL Finland. That's a new GraphQL conference in Finland, of course. And it's going to be really open to a lot of interesting different topics, whereas I feel some of the other GraphQL conferences are organized, by different people. And, everyone organizes their conferences differently and they have different content. This will just be an addition to the existing awesome GraphQL conferences that are already out there. So if you're interested in GraphQL and you're either in Europe or you're interested in visiting Europe, check it out. My other pick is I am doing a free online class or a workshop for React Native in conjunction with TylerMcGinnis.com. It'll be I think it's August 7th, 8th, and 9th. But so you can either go ahead and sign up and tune in live for free for 3 days. It'll be 2 hours per day from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. And we're going to be doing the same workshop that I've done for a lot of Fortune 500 companies, just kind of condensed into a single day, which when I say a single day, it's like 6 hours total spread across 3 days. But if you can't make it to the live thing, you can actually just sign up still, and then you'll receive the videos in your email for free. And then my last pick is AppSync released a bunch of stuff last week. AppSync is what I work with at AWS. It's like a managed GraphQL service. We added new sample schemas or new sample apps, so you can spin up a brand new GraphQL app that does things like having a chat application with user sign-in. We also have a task application that does user authorization and fine-grained access control. We added like a no-code API builder, so you don't have to understand how to kind of generate your schema. You can just create a type, and then we add a bunch of schema and resolvers and data sources for you. It's a much improved version of what we had before. We added HTTP resolvers, which are a way to turn your GraphQL endpoint from a REST API into a GraphQL API. So you literally, if you have an existing HTTP endpoint, you can like turn it into GraphQL. I just played around with this yesterday, and there's this dog API that just returns a bunch of dog pictures. I turned that into GraphQL with literally, I think 10 lines of code, resolver code. So that was pretty cool. And then there's actually a few more features added. But anyway, we just did basically a big release on AppSync. So if you've looked at AppSync in the past, check it out again. We've added a bunch of new stuff to it. Well,
nice.
Yeah, cool stuff.
Hey, what's the link to that course that you're going to do? Actually, I wouldn't mind sitting in and sharing it with a bunch of people. So
it's TylerMcGinnis.com/free React Native Bootcamp. And the free React Native Bootcamp has dashes, between free-react-native.
Awesome. Got it.
Yep, I should have mentioned that link earlier as well. Yeah, so if you want to sign up, TylerMcGinnis.com/free React Native Bootcamp. All right, well, that wraps it up. Thanks for coming on, Gant.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.